There are places in the world where silence isn't the absence of sound, but the presence of something greater. The Australian desert is like that. You can stand for hours hearing nothing but the wind, touching the red earth like strings on a forgotten instrument. I've been there, seen the place where it all happened, and I can tell you the desert keeps secrets no history book will ever record. My name doesn't matter. What matters is, I knew Clayton Reid. Not personally, but through the tracks he left behind. Clayton was what they called a Bushman, a tracker. They said he walked where the wind was born, that he knew every stone, every shadow, every lie the heat told to eyes that didn't know how to see. Some called him a hermit, others a madman. I reckon he was simply someone who understood the world in a way civilization had forgotten. He appeared when no one expected. It was 1942 and Northern Australia was under attack. Japanese planes crossed the sky from the sea, leaving bombs and terror behind. Allied forces were desperately trying to detect them before it was too late, but something was wrong. The desert heat distorted radar signals, creating blind zones the military called the Black Curtain. It was like trying to see through fogged glass while death approached in silence. Engineers tried everything, adjusted frequencies, repositioned antennas, consulted experts from London and Washington. Nothing worked. Heat didn't obey science, and while they argued equations and theories, men died on the coast. That's when someone remembered Clayton. An older officer who'd hunted with him years before said if anyone could do the impossible in that cursed place, it was the Bushman who spoke to the desert like it was human. When Clayton arrived at the base, he caused immediate discomfort. He wore no uniform, gave no salutes, didn't speak the language of military hierarchy. He was a lean man, burned by the sun, with hands that looked made of leather and eyes that observed everything without hurry. Officers treated him with barely disguised contempt, but Clayton didn't care. He walked to the radar tower, touched the ground with his fingers, felt the wind on his face and said something no one forgot. The heat's not the problem. It's the air that's confused. No one understood what he meant. To engineers, air was air. Molecules, density, temperature. Something that could be measured, calculated, predicted. But Clayton saw air as something alive, something that breathed, that lied, that changed mood as the sun rose or fell. He asked for materials that sounded ridiculous. Mirrors, metal wire, wooden stakes. Officers laughed. One asked if he planned to scare off planes with reflections. Clayton didn't answer, just waited until their anger cooled and desperation spoke louder. That night, while the base slept under war's weight, Clayton worked. He built something no engineering manual had ever described. Positioned mirrors around the main tower, adjusted angles with almost religious precision, stretched wires between stakes driven into the ground, following wind patterns. Used no instruments, only his hands, his ears, and that ancient instinct from generations of men who'd learned to read the land before they learned to read words. At dawn, radar operators switched on equipment like they did every day, expecting the same confusion of ghost signals and blind zones. But something had changed. Signals appeared clean, precise, as if the air had been washed overnight. Screens showed the sky as it really was, without distortions, without lies. Engineers didn't believe it, called it coincidence, temporary anomaly. But Clayton stood there beside the tower, watching the horizon with that disturbing calm. One officer asked him to explain what he'd done. Clayton pointed to the mirrors and said, "The sun makes the air breathe wrong. I just taught the air to breathe again." The explanation sounded like absurd poetry to men who'd studied physics at Cambridge. But when Clayton adjusted one mirror and the signal disappeared, then repositioned it and the signal returned, there was no more doubt. The Bushman had done the impossible. He'd tamed the desert. No one knows exactly how it worked. Theories were proposed later. Mirrors redirected heat, creating corridors of cooler air that allowed radar signals to travel without distortion. Wires functioned as passive antennas, capturing and redistributing electromagnetic waves. But these explanations came too late, and Clayton never confirmed them. For him, it wasn't science, it was listening. Hours after the installation was working perfectly, radar caught something. Luminous dots appearing on the screen's edge, moving in formation. Japanese aircraft. The siren tore through morning silence, and the entire base went on alert. For the first time since attacks began, they knew the enemy was coming before bombs fell. Anti-aircraft defenses were positioned, fighters took off, and when Japanese planes crossed the coast, they were met by a wall of fire they didn't expect. The sky filled with smoke and twisted metal. Explosions echoed over the desert like thunder born from human rage. Some planes were shot down before reaching their targets. Others retreated, confused, unable to understand how they'd lost the element of surprise. When it ended, silence returned. But it was different silence. The silence of those who'd just bought time, who'd seen death arrive and managed to say no. Base personnel searched for Clayton, wanted to thank him, shake his hand, perhaps even propose a medal or official recognition. But he'd disappeared, simply vanished, as if he'd never been there. On the ground beside the tower, they found a crumpled piece of paper written in charcoal. "Don't thank me, thank the land." In following months, the system Clayton created kept working. Other attacks were detected. Lives were saved. Engineers tried replicating the method at other bases but failed. Seemed each desert had its own language and only Clayton knew how to translate it. He was never seen again. Some said he returned to the interior, to places where maps end and Earth's memory begins. Others swore they saw him years later, always alone, always walking as if searching for something only he knew was lost. The war ended. Military bases were deactivated. The desert returned to being just desert, and Clayton Reid's story was filed in reports no one reads. No ceremony, no statue. Just a footnote in a classified document saying, "Unconventional method applied successfully by unidentified civilian." As if he were merely a detail, a curiosity, an accident. But I know it wasn't accident, and anyone who knows the desert knows too. Decades later I returned to that place. The radar tower was in ruins, covered in rust and red dust. Wind blew with the same constancy as always, indifferent to time, indifferent to men. I walked the ground where Clayton had worked, and felt something strange, as if the air still remembered what had happened there, as if the desert kept memory. I found a fragment buried in sand, a piece of mirror, still reflecting light with the same precision from decades ago. Held that dirty piece of glass and thought about Clayton, thought about how history chooses its heroes and how, often, it forgets the real ones. He saved lives, changed the course of battles. And all that remained of him was a crumpled note and a broken mirror lost in the middle of nowhere. There's something deeply unjust about that, but also something deeply true. Clayton didn't want glory. He wasn't a soldier, didn't fight for flags or ideologies. He fought because he understood the desert was part of him, and he was part of the desert, and when you understand that, you can't stand still while the world burns. He did what needed doing, then disappeared, because men like him don't belong to medals or speeches. They belong to the land. I sat there for hours, watching the horizon. Sun descended slowly, painting the sky orange and red, and for a moment I had the sensation someone was beside me. Wasn't fear, was company. As if Clayton was still there, watching, making sure the desert kept breathing right. I know it sounds mad, but whoever's never been in that place can't judge what you feel when the wind changes direction, and you swear you hear a voice saying everything's all right. The war ended long ago, but its marks remain, not just in bombed cities or monuments to the fallen, but also in forgotten places like that, places where ordinary men did extraordinary things without expecting anything in return, and perhaps that's what matters most in the end. Not the great generals or brilliant strategies, but small acts of silent genius that save lives then disappear like footprints in sand. Clayton Reid existed. I know because I saw what he left behind. Not just mirrors and wires, but something greater. Proof there's knowledge outside books, that there's wisdom in the hands of those who touch the earth every day. I spoke with some veterans before writing this. Old men now, with memories fogged by time, but all remembered that day. The day the radar started working, the day they saw planes before it was too late, asked if they remembered Clayton. Most shook their heads. One said, "There was a strange bloke. Came, fiddled with some things and left. Thought he was some technician." Another laughed and said, "Oh yeah, the Mad Mirror Man. No one understood what he did, but it worked." Mad Mirror Man. That's how he remained in their memory, not as hero but as an eccentricity. An anecdote told in pubs to other veterans who no longer care about details. And maybe that's better. Maybe Clayton preferred being remembered as the Mad Mirror Man than as a symbol he never asked to be. What intrigues me isn't just what he did, but how. How does someone look at a problem trained engineers can't solve and see the solution in mirrors and wind? How does someone trust their own perception enough to ignore all established science? Reckon the answer lies in something we've lost along the way. The ability to listen, not just with ears but with the whole body, to feel the world instead of just measuring it. Clayton grew up in the desert, spent his life tracking animals, reading invisible signs, surviving in a place that kills those who don't know how to move in it. For him, heat wasn't a variable in an equation. It was a living presence. Wind wasn't just moving air. It was a messenger. And when you live like that long enough, you start seeing patterns others don't see. Start understanding everything's connected in ways Cartesian logic can't explain. I'm not saying science is useless. Far from it. But I am saying there are limits. Moments when technical knowledge must bow before raw experience, before ancestral intuition. And 1942, in that forgotten piece of Australia, was one of those moments. Engineers had the tools, but Clayton had the vision. And vision in the end always wins. I think about this when I look at the world today. How many problems do we try solving with more technology, more data, more complexity, when the solution might be in something simple we've forgotten to consider? How often do we ignore knowledge from those who live close to the problem because they haven't got a degree or title? Clayton shouldn't have succeeded, not according to military logic of the time. He was a complete outsider. No formal training, no credentials, no respect for hierarchies that kept the whole system functioning. And yet when all experts failed, he was the one who found the way. That says something about the nature of genius. It doesn't ask permission, doesn't follow protocols, appears where we least expect, usually in the hands of those we'd never imagine. There's an arrogance in war, a belief that victory belongs to those with more resources, more technology, more power. But history's full of moments when one man with a simple idea changes everything. Clayton was one of those moments. He had no army, had mirrors, had no strategy, had listening. And somehow that was enough. But I want to be honest about something. I don't romanticize what happened. Clayton saved lives that day, yes. But lives were lost on the other side too. Japanese pilots who fell because the radar worked. Men who had families, dreams, reasons to believe they were on the right side. War has no right sides, just has sides. And Clayton's trick, brilliant as it was a tool of death as much as any bomb or machine gun. Did he know that? Reckon he did. Reckon that's why he disappeared. Not from modesty, but from weight. The weight of knowing his hands, which knew so well how to heal the land, had been used to help kill. There's no glory in that, only necessity. The terrible and inevitable necessity war imposes on everyone it touches. Maybe that's why he left that note. Don't thank me. Thank the land. As if saying, I didn't do this, just translated what the desert already knew. As if trying to wash hands of guilt that stuck anyway. Don't know, never will. Clayton took his thoughts with him when he vanished, and the desert doesn't speak in words we can understand. What I know is, he carried something many soldiers carry. The paradox of doing right in a wrong way, of saving lives by taking others, of using wisdom to feed violence. That corrodes a man. Doesn't matter how much they say he's a hero. At the end of the night, alone, he knows what he did. And sometimes that's too heavy to carry in places where there are people. That's why the desert, why the silence, why the disappearance. Some say Clayton was seen other times, always far away, always alone. A farmer swore he appeared during a terrible drought, showed where to dig for water, and left before they could ask his name. A woman in a ghost town said a man matching his description fixed her radio using only wire and patience, then refused money and kept walking. Don't know if these stories are true, but I want them to be. Want to believe Clayton kept doing what he knew how to do. Help, fix, listen. Not for recognition, but because that's what he was. a man who understood the world's always breaking and always needing hands that know how to put it back together, even if temporarily, even if no one sees. There's a kind of heroism in that which seems more true to me than medals and parades, silent heroism. The kind that doesn't make headlines because it happens in places headlines don't reach. It's the heroism of those who help, because helping's the only thing that makes sense in a world that often makes no sense at all. Clayton was never celebrated, but also never forgotten. Not completely. He exists in the margins of military reports, in confused memories of veterans, in stories farmers tell each other when night falls and the desert fills with mystery. He exists as legend. And legends, unlike official heroes, don't need statues to survive. They live in people's mouths. In how we tell stories to remember, there's still magic in the world, even when the world insists on being only war and pain. I think about this when I look at that mirror I found. It's with me now. Keep it in a box along with other things that have no value to anyone but me. Now and then I take it out and hold it to the light. And I swear that for a second, I see more than just my reflection. See the desert, see the tower, see Clayton working alone in darkness, trusting something no one else trusted. And I wonder, how many Claytons exist now? How many people with deep and humble knowledge are being ignored because they don't fit what we expect from genius? How many simple solutions are we missing because we insist on complicating everything? War teaches many things, most of them horrible. But if there's one lesson worth saving from that time, it's this. Sometimes the answer's where you least expect, with whom you least imagine, and if you're wise, you'll listen. Years after everything, I found a document in a forgotten archive. It was a technical report about that radar's operation. Pages and pages of analyses, graphs, theories about why the system worked. At the end, a single handwritten line, almost illegible. Unorthodox implementation. Inexplicable results. Future investigation recommended. The future investigation never happened. Document was filed and forgotten. That sums up how we treat what we don't understand. If something works but doesn't fit our categories, we simply ignore it. Better to forget than admit our understanding might be limited. Better to file than question. And so we lose not just Clayton's story, but the chance to learn from it. Imagine how different it would be if he'd been taken seriously. If someone had sat with him and asked, with genuine humility, how he saw the world, how many other problems could have been solved, how many additional lives could have been saved, but that would have required officers trained in prestigious academies to admit a man without formal education knew more about that specific place than all of them combined. And pride rarely allows that. The desert has no pride. It simply exists. And those who learn to exist with it, like Clayton, acquire wisdom no university can teach. It's the wisdom of patient observation, of understanding you don't dominate nature. You negotiate with it, you listen, you respect, and if you're lucky, it teaches. Clayton learned these lessons long before the war, learned tracking kangaroos under scorching sun, learned finding water where everyone said there was none, learned surviving in an environment that doesn't forgive mistakes. And when war asked for something he could give, he gave, not because he was patriotic or wanted glory, but because people were dying and he had a solution. Sometimes I think he mustn't have liked helping, must have hated seeing his wisdom used for war, but did it anyway, because the alternative was worse and then vanished because staying would have meant becoming part of the machine, would have meant accepting medals and shaking hands and pretending what he did was heroic instead of just necessary. I understand that. Understand the urge to disappear after doing something that changes everything, to return to the place where you're just you. The wind changed direction while I sat in those ruins, felt it on my skin, cold and sudden, coming from a direction that made no meteorological sense. And for an instant I had absolute certainty Clayton was there, not as ghost or spirit, but as presence, as part of the place. As if he'd merged with the desert in such a way it was now impossible to say where the man ended and the land began. Got up and walked to where the tower used to stand. Structure had collapsed decades ago, but the base was still there, rusted, covered in sand. touched the cold metal and tried imagining what it was like that morning in 1942. The fear, the urgency, Clayton working under stars while war slept. And then, the miracle, the impossible becoming real. I'm not religious, but there are moments when life seems bigger than we can explain. And that was one of those moments. Stood there, wind cutting my face, holding a broken mirror, and felt I was participating in something ancient. A story that didn't begin in 1942 and didn't end when Clayton disappeared. A story about the relationship between humans and land, about respect, about listening, about genius that doesn't need applause. When I finally left that place, promised myself I wouldn't let the story die, that I'd tell whoever wanted to hear. Not to turn Clayton into myth, he's already myth, but to remember myths exist for a reason. They teach us something essential about who we are and who we could be. Clayton Reid was imperfect, probably difficult, certainly strange, but when the world needed him, he was there, and did something no one else could do. Then vanished, because real greatness doesn't need a stage. It just happens, leaves marks, and disappears. The desert's still there. Wind still blows, and somewhere maybe Clayton still walks. Old now if still alive, or perhaps already part of the land he knew so well. Doesn't matter. He's already done what needed doing, saved lives, showed there's more between heaven and earth than our vain philosophy can dream, and left behind a broken mirror and a story worth telling. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Stories like this only survive if someone carries them, and now you're part of it too. You know about Clayton, about the Bushman who outsmarted the empire, about the desert trick that saved Australia. Before leaving that place for the last time, I did something I hadn't planned. Dug a small hole beside the tower ruins. Not deep, just enough. And buried the mirror I'd found. Don't know why. Maybe because it belonged to that place. Maybe because some things need to stay where they were used. Maybe because it was my way of saying thanks. Covered the hole with red sand and stood there a few more minutes. Sun was setting, and the sky had that golden quality that only exists in the desert. Felt like end of a film, but it was just end of day. Tomorrow the sun would return, and the desert would keep being desert. Indifferent, eternal, keeping secrets humans leave behind. Thought about all the wars that have been fought and all that'll still come. Thought about how many will have their Claytons, ordinary people with uncommon wisdom. Doing the impossible, vanishing before applause, existing only as footnotes or not even that, and wondered if that's all right, if maybe true heroism is exactly that, what no one sees, what no one celebrates, what simply happens because it needs to happen. Reckon it is. Reckon that's all right. While driving back to civilization, looked in the rearview mirror. Desert got smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. But the feeling that something important had happened there remained. Not just in 1942, but that day too, the day I chose to remember, chose to tell, chose not to let forgetting win. Clayton Reid saved Australia. Not alone, course, but his part was real, was essential, and even though official history doesn't know his name, even though there are no monuments or medals, he remains present, in the stories we tell, in buried mirrors, in the wind that still blows over that red land as if carrying memory. Some wars end with treaties and ceremonies. Others end in silence in the desert, with a man walking toward the horizon. And maybe those are the most important. The ones no one sees ending, because they never really end. Keep echoing, asking to be remembered, waiting for someone who'll listen. I listened, and now you have too.